Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name, and Heroes of the Storm is the game. And this is my look at the 5 worst traits in Heroes of the Storm. I recently made a video talking about the 5 best traits, but these are the 5 traits I think could use a little bit of a buff, or really don't have that much of an impact on the hero, or don't fit in with the rest of the hero's kit, or make them any better. So starting off right away with number 5, my 5th worst trait in Heroes of the Storm belongs to the Lost Vikings and the trait Viking Horde. Gathering a regeneration globe with a Viking permanently increases all their health regeneration by 0.5 per second. So the way the Vikings work, this actually fits into their kit pretty well. Typically people will split a Viking into each lane. But that said, they're not always gathering regeneration globes. Often the Viking will be hiding in a bush or backed off a little bit to remain safe from ganks, because you can't necessarily monitor all Vikings at every time. You have to be a very conscious and incredibly skilled player to actually go in and grab the regeneration globes religiously. That said, you'll still pick up a lot of regen globes from allied heroes running by them when you're close by, camps, and various other things. So the health regeneration starts to add up. But the problem is 2/3 of your characters are relatively squishy. So health regen doesn't make a big enough impact to keep them alive in late game team fights. Eric is still going to die very quickly if the enemy team gets their hands on him, regardless of how much health regen he has. He just doesn't have a large enough health pool to benefit. So this only gets good in the late game once it's stacked up and added up. And that's when the Vikings have trouble, is fighting in the late game. So even Balog has trouble staying alive. Now certainly Olaf can benefit from lots of health regen. He has a pretty big health pool. He's very tanky, so it does start to work there. And if you play your Vikings well and you back off at the right times and poke, you can regen some health, take some pressure off your healers. But it's still just not that good. There are so many different ways you could have made this interesting. This is part of a nerf that the Vikings received, and it felt like Blizzard didn't really know what the new trait was supposed to be, so they kind of just tacked this one on as an afterthought. And it doesn't feel like the Lost Vikings. It's incredibly generic in nature, and it's just not a good trait. But it's not the worst. Moving on to the 4th worst trait in Heroes of the Storm, belongs to Lieutenant Morales and Caduceus Reactor. Regenerate 3% of your maximum health every second after not taking damage for 4 seconds. So this is basically Muradin's trait, Second Wind, but just ported over to Lieutenant Morales. And the idea is that Morales can't heal herself until talenting into it at level 13. So I guess Blizzard wanted to give her a way to stay topped off in maximum health during downtime, essentially. When she's not in a fight, she can back off, gain some health, get right back in without having to waste mana healing herself. And in principle, it makes a little bit of sense. I understand the mindset, but in practice, it's just not all that useful. In team fights in particular, it feels like your trait is kind of just turned off because her healing beam range is not long enough that she can just leave for 10 or 15 seconds to regen health and leave her team to die. Also, of course, enemies have a very strong tendency to focus Lieutenant Morales down and try to kill her quickly with burst damage. When you're taking damage, Caduceus Reactor doesn't do anything for you at all. It doesn't give you any extra survivability, so it doesn't really help in those scenarios. It's not even good in lanes because Lieutenant Morales cannot clear a minion wave to save her life, so she has to stay out there forever, poking them down with auto attack after auto attack. Which means she can't leave to get to safety and go heal up, or her wave is just lost forever. Just nothing about this really makes sense for the character. Until, that is, you actually get to level 20 and you pick up Caduceus Reactor 2.0, suddenly it gives you a nice shield, and it gives you mana regen as well, both of which are absolutely fantastic for Lieutenant Morales. Incredibly good, makes her so strong at level 20. If this was built into her trait, but just scaled back a little bit, in other words, maybe it only gives her an extra 2 to 4 mana per second, and it gives a small shield. And these are already scaled down numbers compared to what you'd see at level 20. But just a scaled back version of this, suddenly Caduceus Reactor would be very strong, even if you reduced the health regen down to 1 or 2% as well. So that's what I'd like to see. But as it stands right now, one of the worst traits in the game, and a pretty lazy port of Muradin's, if I do have to say so myself. Moving on to the third worst trait in Heroes of the Storm, it actually belongs to Cho of Cho'Gall, the two-headed hero that is controlled by 2 players. Cho, of course, is the warrior side, and the player that controls the movement of Cho. He's a tanky character by nature. His trait is called Two-Headed. Gall is permanently attached to you, going where you go. In other words, Cho's trait is really nothing at all. It's just a function of the creative hero design that Blizzard provided, but it's not actually any extra advantage or anything at all. They basically just took a whiff on this trait and said, yeah, that's a part of the fundamental design, we'll just give it a name and assign it to Cho, even though it doesn't actually do anything in particular extra that wasn't already a part of the hero's design. So probably the laziest attempt. Now you might say, well, what about Gall? Does he have a trait? He actually does have a pretty neat one. It's also called Two-Headed. You're permanently attached to Cho, going where he goes. So far it sounds identical, but there's a pretty cool part. You're immune to stun and silence effects. That's actually Gall's trait. So that's pretty fantastic. He's totally immune to stuns and silences, which means there's never any downtime no matter what happens to Cho. So if Cho had something like you're immune to blinds, maybe that would work, right? That could be, since he has 2 small eyes instead of 1 big one, maybe he's immune to blinds. If they added that onto Cho's two-headed part, at least he'd have a little something to work with. But as it stands right now, it's just the laziest trait in the game, and it's totally meaningless. But it's fun, so it's not technically the worst, I guess. Moving on to the second worst trait in Heroes of the Storm, I'm going to move over to Tychus, one of the least popular and generally negatively viewed heroes in the game, and the trait Minigun. Your attack speed increases the longer that you attack, becoming fully wound up after 4 basic attacks, and it lasts for 3 seconds. So Tychus is another hero where this trait is really just kind of a fundamental element of his design, but it's not even a good one. It's actually kind of an annoying one. Tychus can certainly do a ton of damage if people just stand there and let you shoot them with minigun wound up all the way. But the reality of Heroes of the Storm is that people like to move. They have escape abilities. Stutter stepping is required at high levels of play if you want to stay in range of people and do maximum damage. All of which make Tychus's life a lot harder when it comes to basic attacks. He's also very susceptible to blinds that are now based on duration instead of number of attacks. So the change to blind quite a ways back just made Tychus even worse. Really overkill is how Tychus basic attacks in most cases. So minigun is just awkward. It would be better if it were just standard like a Rainer, I feel like. The idea is fun, but the execution is pretty poor, and it's more penalizing than it is beneficial, which is not what you want in your trait. There are a lot of different ways Blizzard could change this to make it better and more enjoyable, frankly. But as it stands right now, minigun is one of the many things holding back Tychus in the metagame. But it's not the worst trait. You probably have an idea what the worst trait in the game is. It actually belongs to another character whose name starts with T-Y, much like Tychus, but this time it is Tyrael. And the trait is Archangel's Wrath. When you die, become invulnerable. Now that's weird wording right there. I'm dead. I presume I'm invulnerable. How can I take damage if I'm already dead? So when you die, become invulnerable and explode for 456 damage after 3.5 seconds. So we've all seen this. Tyrael dies. He turns into this angel with this big circle around him, and he starts roaming around the map, trying effortlessly and unsuccessfully to catch an enemy hero in that circle before he explodes, hitting them for a moderately substantial amount of damage. The problem with Archangel's Wrath is that it doesn't really fit the fantasy of Tyrael, first off. Secondly, it's only good when you're dead, which is pretty bad as the tank. You don't really want to die first and leave your team without recourse. Even as an off-tank, it's still never great to die. And you don't want to die to take advantage of your trait necessarily, so that's kind of punishing. But even when it's successful, even if you catch 1 or 2 heroes in it, the damage isn't like off the charts crazy. It doesn't like instantly kill anyone. If it did something like that, it'd be much better, where you could almost force a trade anytime Tyrael died, but that's not the case. It's very hard to actually catch people because you move at a normal speed, so people who juke you at all are probably going to get outside the circle. Just everything about this is hard. The duration, it takes 3.5 seconds before it goes off, so it gives people plenty of time to escape. It's not like instant where as soon as you die you explode and punish the melee attacker who killed you. That might make it a little better and harder to escape. You could like suicide bomb as Tyrael essentially. It's just nothing about it's right. It feels bad when you use it. I've seen a couple instances where a Tyrael will dive the enemy core, bang it down to 1 or maybe 3%, and then die and explode for the win. That happens 1 out of every 1,000,000 games, and it's a cool highlight, but it does not a good trait make. In fact, a terrible trait makes. And Archangel's Wrath is exactly that. A terribly designed and poorly executed trait that is without a doubt in my mind the very worst trait in Heroes of the Storm. So there you have it. Those are my 5 worst traits in the game. If you think I'm crazy, let me know. I'd love to hear what your worst trait is. I'm pretty sure it's Tyrael, so maybe let me know what your second worst trait in the game is. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, game on.